Hello and welcome to Jordan on Games with me, Jordan. Today I'm going to talk about a game I completed relatively recently. This was not something that I would technically consider as part of my backlog, seeing as I only bought the game on a sale in December and I completed it just the other night. And that game is Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. The sequel to the imaginatively titled Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine, which is a game that I did not play. And let's take a look at some footage of me playing it. So roll the camera, Jeremy.
Changing magazine. Pathetic Tyranid abomination. Fresh munitions. Rearming. Stand resolute against the sea.
That was me playing Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2. I'm just going to call it Space Marine 2 from now on because the whole name is a little bit of a mouthful. Now, just a brief little bit of background. I briefly dabbled with Warhammer in secondary school. It's not something that I super, engaged with on a real deep level. I bought a few sets. I mostly stuck to playing Magic the Gathering because I was really cool, and that's what all the cool kids were playing. Warhammer always had that little bit of extra level of financial investment. The sets were expensive, and I'm also really bad at painting. Because one of the big parts of Warhammer is painting the miniatures and making them look really cool and detailed, and that was just not something I was ever good at. So maybe I've played like 3 or 4 games of Warhammer, Warhammer 40,000 that is, in my life. So it's a series I know a little bit about. I know the main factions, I know some of the history, but other than that, it's relatively new to me, a lot of this stuff. And I know there are a lot of Warhammer 40k video games out there of different kinds. And this is the first one that I've ever played. As I say, it's a sequel. I did not play the original. I didn't think like that had a big impact on my ability to follow the story. There are some elements from the previous game that are referenced, 1 or 2 character reveals that I guess are supposed to resonate with you if you played the first game. I never did, so they didn't land with me as they were probably intended to, but that didn't seem to matter to me particularly. I still enjoyed the story for what it was, and I really enjoyed this game, which is great actually. I'm on a real good run of playing games that I really enjoyed, and what I really loved about this game is just a really video game. It's big dudes in big armor with big guns shooting aliens and shooting other big dudes with big guns, and it's really satisfying. I played it on PlayStation 5, so you have that good haptic feedback on the controller that really works when you're squeezing the trigger to take down these aliens, especially with the chunkier kind of machine guns and rifles. It feels like the controller's really chugging as you're mowing down these aliens. Really satisfying. And there's a decent variety of weapons. You've got your standard kind of pistols and rifles, machine guns. Melee combat is a really important part of the flow of the combat in this game. You've got swords, you've got a power sword, which is essentially a sword with a chainsaw attached to it. Now, if this is all sounding a little bit Gears of War, then you would think that that's right, because it is very Gears of War in many ways. Although when you think about how these things came out, I really feel like Gears of War was inspired by Warhammer 40k and the Space Marines, and there are a lot of similarities there in the gameplay style. No real cover mechanics in this game, or reload mechanics in this game, which were one of the two of the big gameplay hooks for Gears of War. This is pretty much a straight shooter, but one that's really, really engaging. You get a jetpack at times, you can kind of fly around the environment, and there are some different sort of abilities that you can use to kind of smash enemies from afar or hover and shoot them from afar, which works quite nicely. But again, just really engaging, really satisfying gunplay through some really beautiful levels, like the art design, the architectural design, the way these levels are graphically created is absolutely superb. A lot of color in this game. You know, that you're playing an ultramarine, so they have these big blue suits of armor which really pop, and there's, you know, there's all sorts of flashes of gunfire and all kinds of lasers and all that sort of stuff, which add a bit of color to proceedings. You know, lots of blood, that kind of thing adds that splash of red when you're fighting some of the enemies or really going at them with your chainsaw sword, and really help kind of add to the visual splendor of this game, is what I'm going to call it. It also does a really, really good job of making you feel like you are in the middle of a war. There's always something going on in the distance. You can always see another battle happening, hordes of enemies approaching, you know, ship battles happening in the sky, things collapsing, running into other groups of soldiers from different kind of supporting factions. Really helped convey that idea that this just is an all-out battle against these enemies. And to go with that, it really helps accentuate how you are these respected, revered, almost warriors. You know, everybody calls you my lord when you're walking past some of the regular soldiers. They kneel down as a sign of respect. It really does a great job of placing you in the world, in the conflict, and what your particular capacity is within this world, and it does that super, super effectively. I think it took me roughly about 10 hours. It's about 6 main missions and a prologue, which isn't very long, but it is a shooter, so I think that is pretty appropriate for that length for this particular type of game. There is a multiplayer element. I'm not a big online multiplayer guy, so I will leave others to comment on that, because that's not something that I engaged with as part of my playtime. I just focused on the story, completing that. There are some co-op levels called operations. I tried a couple of those. There's different classes to pick from. You can customize your weapons and armor and all that sort of thing with different looks, so that's quite fun. But if you are into online multiplayer, then probably do check that out. And there's other people who have spoken on this game who have talked about the multiplayer very extensively. But on the whole, I really enjoyed Space Marine 2. Looking at it from a critical perspective, maybe they could have mixed up the way the levels kind of roll out. They are all very similar. You move through the levels, you fight the enemies. There are a couple of collectibles to find in kind of audio logs, not too many, which I appreciated. So perhaps it gets a little bit repetitive, but the satisfying nature of the combat and the visual splendor of these levels that you're looking at really sort of helped smooth over that particular criticism, and that's really the only criticism that I have. It ran really well. I didn't have any frame rate drops. As I say, this is a really video gamey video game, and I mean that in a good way, because sometimes you can mean that in a bad way. But Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2, really enjoyed it. If you're into shooters, into Warhammer, into that Gears of War style, I recommend you check it out. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video and listening to me ramble on, then please do hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me out. I'm just rebooting this channel after a couple of years away, so it's going to take some time, but the more people who join me on the journey, the better. So thanks very much for joining me, and I'll see you on the next one.